Hello guys, my name is SVB and I'm back with another video, and today we're going to be continuing the thought process series with the thought process behind DPS picks. Now obviously there's a lot of DPS to cover, more than the other two roles combined, so I'm going to have to split this video up to avoid it being way too long. But without further ado, let's get to covering part 1 of which DPS to pick and why. Now I'm going to start this video by covering the main Hitscan heroes of Overwatch, so we're going to start with McCree, Ashe, Widowmaker, and Soldier 76. For those of you who don't know, the term Hitscan simply refers to a hero whose bullets travel instantly, i.e. when you click on the screen, your gun will instantly hit whatever you're pointing at. This is opposed to projectiles, for example, like a fire rocket, which has a travel time that must be accounted for. Now I'm covering the Hitscan heroes together because, firstly, they have the greatest overlap of skill set amongst any heroes in Overwatch. Secondly, they all tend to be employed in similar situations, but they have subtle variations in their effective ranges and their abilities that mean that they all have their own little niche to fit into. So let's start by talking about these ranges. Essentially, you can put McCree, Ashe, and Widowmaker on a sliding scale of range. We'll get to Soldier later. Think of this as something like a Pokemon evolution of range, except their power levels don't change. McCree is the shortest range, Widowmaker the longest, and Ashe is somewhere in between. Now, why is this the case? Well, the easiest to explain this with is with Widowmaker. We all know the Widowmaker is a sniper, and this is because her gun has a very long zoom distance and is most effective when scoped in. It does alright in SMG mode, but her primary purpose is to charge up shots and line up insta-kills. Now, while Widow's scope gives her great reach, it also makes her very vulnerable because it requires her to literally tunnel vision onto one narrow area. She also can't move very fast while scoped, making her very easy to hit. These two combined mean that being within range of most other characters in Overwatch makes Widowmaker a squishy target to kill. However, because she possesses more range than anyone else in Overwatch, if she can stay far enough back, she can wreak havoc. That's why Widowmaker is most effective on maps with the longest sightlines, places like Junkertown, Ilios Ruins, Anubis Point A. Widowmaker needs clear, unobstructed sightlines to thrive. Now I'm going to show you some examples from some clutch Widowmaker moments in Overwatch League. And as you watch these and admire the incredible technical ability on display, think about what all these clips have in common.
Now on Genji to pressure him down. Soon's gonna stay on this Widow to see if he can get something going to clean up when his other pressure comes in, but he's gotta be your priority #1 right now, and look at it, he's just taking another angle. Oh my god!
Oh, there we go, Sire! Triple kill from him! The huge plays! Just tombing him! Get out, Valiant! Jumped on, but it looks like the Boston Uprising are too busy trying to take the point. That's the Widow duel 1. Again, Philadelphia Fusion always going to come out on top. Striker though lands a big triple on the barrage there. The Graviton helping. Both supports are caught together. That's what they needed, but Carpe strikes in again. Striking down. Felix also being removed. Carpe, what are you doing? This is unbelievable. It turns around and gets on the point. Inquo follows it up. How have they redone this? How do you retake it?
Now what you should have seen in those clips is that our Widowmaker players were able to capitalize on having one long, clean sightline that had all the opposition players in one frame. If you have to constantly look from one side of the map to the next for kills, you're going to have a hard time, and you're going to be afraid of scoping in for fear of being snuck up on. But, like I said, if you can have everybody in front of you and position yourself in a way that doesn't let you get surprised, you'll be golden. Now to illustrate my point, I brought out some top-down views of maps in Overwatch where Widowmaker is generally picked and is generally strong. The red lines indicate sightlines, and as you can see, all these maps have exactly what I've been talking about. Clear sightlines from one end to the next that give Widowmaker the chance to be very far away, while also being lethal. Compare this now to McCree. Unlike Widowmaker, McCree suffers from fall-off damage, meaning that far-away characters take less damage from his shots, and he becomes increasingly ineffective the further the enemy is. That makes him, in many ways, the opposite of Widowmaker. Of course, he's not a melee hero, but McCree needs to be up close and personal to be at his strongest. Let's look at some plays from the god tier McCree himself, Pine, and observe the difference between these and the Widowmaker clips we saw earlier.
Meanwhile, Houston taking the point. Can they do it? Ooh, they can. They flip it. Get the control percent rolling early. Jonak does go down. A res comes in from NYXL, and here comes Pine. Gets one, gets two. Looking for a bit more. Gets another one. Are you kidding me? This guy is going to single-handedly change the point back over to NYXL.
Gonna kill everybody.
Whoa! Okay. Pine, big boss Pine is on the scene.
The Pharah again, and we're going to see how long he wants to live this life, because he's going to have to try to deal with Pine. You can do it! Well, not that time he can't, as he gets disconnected from his Mercy, finds himself in Pine's crosshairs right there, and they continue to get... He's so aggro on this McCree, he rolls in, somersaults in, that's another 3-kill life for Pine.
Okay, so in the span of 25 seconds, he gets the dead-eye! I can't even finish.
So it should have been immediately obvious that Pine is playing much closer up on McCree than Saya Player or Carpe were on Widowmaker. Again, he has no scope, so to some extent, he has to do this so that his shots do more damage, but also because it allows for the use of flashbang, which is one of the best parts of McCree's kit. You'll notice, a couple of times, Pine actually rolls forward into the enemy. Now, I'm not saying to do this in your ladder games, because you have to bear in mind that he's playing a particularly aggressive McCree, who's only able to do this because of the Mercy pocket he had. But it shows you how McCree needs to get into the range of his enemies, unlike Widowmaker. That's why McCree's more suited to maps and situations where the sightlines are not overly long, and there's relatively smaller areas where he can roam and get within reach of people and catch them around corners. Ilios Lighthouse and Well, for example, where Pine was first dubbed Big Boss, is exactly this kind of map. Notice how much shorter the sightlines are on this one, compared to the others I showed you. This really is the perfect range for McCree. Any further than this, and his damage would start to fall off. But there's also cover here for McCree to hide behind. Because he's required to be in at least medium distance, McCree can leave himself very vulnerable, and he has no real escape abilities. His role will not get him far. That's why he needs protection, either from his team or natural cover. And that's where a lot of McCrees end up crossing the line between being aggressive and feeding because they overestimate how safe they are. Now Ashe fits somewhere in the middle of these two. The reason for this is fairly simple. Her scope is not as powerful as Widowmaker's. I mean, it's good, but it's not as good, but it gives her more range than McCree. And her hipfire is not as good as McCree's regular shots at medium range, nor does she have a close range disable like flashbang, but it's still a lot more than Widowmaker can do, and she's still very lethal. And that kinda sums up where Ashe thrives, somewhere in between McCree and Widowmaker. Not as close, not as far. Her kit is a bit more diverse than the other two as well. McCree's role and flashbang primarily just add to the mid/close range DPS, while Widow's grapple and mine just allow her more options to stay away from enemies and warn her of their arrival. Ashe, meanwhile, has her coach gun, which can both knock people back who get too close, and also allow her high ground mobility. Then there's her dynamite, which is a great area of effectability, and Bob, who can cause absolute havoc at lower ranks where people are often not using cover properly. He's an alternative way of zone control to High Noon, and often more reliable. So even as I list these things, you can see how she mixes and matches the two modes there. A bit of range, a bit of damage, a bit of crowd control. But the decision of when to pick her is a little bit more complicated. Ultimately, it comes down to preference. There isn't that many situations where I could say that she'll guarantee do a better job than McCree or Widowmaker, because they're both already very good at their jobs, and there's comparatively fewer situations where Ashe is ideal. Overall, she's definitely more interchangeable with McCree than anyone else. However, there is one type of setup that really favors Ashe, more than the other two, and that is a bunker setup. I've mentioned bunker setups previously in the series, so if you've been paying attention, you should know what kind of heroes that involves and what kind of maps. The screenshot you can see here is from a Contenders game I just happened to be watching a while back, where they ran Ashe to great success in a bunker versus goats, even managing to full hold on Rialto. Places like Hanamura A is probably where I've most frequently seen Ashe be played at the highest levels of Overwatch, because it suits her perfectly. The high ground is too far away from the gate to be in McCree's optimal range, but Widowmaker doesn't put out the consistent oppressive spam damage that a bunker comp needs. Ashe can lay down the damage both with her shots and her dynamite, which is perfect for hurting the clumped up enemies that might be trying to come through the choke. She still brings the big pick potential that a Widowmaker might, and she can do all this from behind the safety of a shield, so she doesn't have to worry about scoping out. Think of her as doing an alternative job to what Junkrat would do in this setup, and don't worry, we'll get to him eventually. But before we stray onto different shores, let's wrap up the hit scan. Many of you have probably been thinking, hello, Soldier, what about Soldier? And don't worry to all you AKMs out there, I didn't forget. I put Soldier apart a little bit because he operates slightly differently to the other 3 hit scans I mentioned. Whereas the others sit on that sliding scale I mentioned and change their viability based on range, Soldier is much more based on situation. On top of that, Soldier's aim also operates differently. So let's go through that first. Now the first 3 hit scans all operate on burst damage. Each click of the mouse chunking out a large hit of damage. Soldier, on the other hand, relies on small, consistent amounts of damage. Now where this difference manifests itself is in the difference between flick aiming and tracking. You see, if you flick aim, you'll naturally gravitate towards burst heroes, because one correct flick onto a head with your high damage hero, and you instantly get a kill. However, with Soldier, if you're not consistently tracking your target and only flick onto them every so often, you'll spend a lot of your firing time not actually doing damage. So that's why, even though Soldier's hit scan like McCree and Ashe, and Widowmaker, he often still feels a little bit different to hit scan players. Now, when it comes to why you pick Soldier, again, we have to go back to the idea of consistency. Soldier is great at outputting damage consistently because of the nature of his clip, as I just mentioned. And in the days when Soldier was more meta, he was quite the tank buster and choke spammer for this reason. However, since then, after all the changes, the biggest reason to pick Soldier now is his kit. You'd want to pick him if you've got a nice position and you think your backline is going to get dove on. Essentially in that scenario, you can sit with your Ana and or Zen, drop your healing station, and make yourselves unkillable for a little while. Here's a clip from the Dallas Fuel v Houston Outlaws game from the Dallas Homecoming in Stage 2. You can see that the Fuel are running a Soldier Ana that they've put on this high ground on Gibraltar A. Now, in the first part of this clip, you're going to see how much damage Soldier can consistently churn out when left uncontested like that. Even before the video starts, you can see how much ahead of most other players AKM is to his ultimate. Now as the clip plays, watch what happens.
Aim for you, but it won't shoot through walls, so they have to wait for the perfect opportunity. See what Zachary is waiting to drop down as they approach. Here he comes.
EMP's gonna be coming out. He finds all 6 of them. The heal denied. Layered in just for good measure. And AKM.
Bam. 1 Helix rocket, 2 kills. Now fast forward to the next fight, and you'll see the other advantage of running Soldier here.
Further their dive with Luma. So it's rough, you know. Dallas Fuel has figured out, okay, you're not summoning players in. This is the strat we're going to run. You don't have a good way to deal with Soldier at range.
Really found a pick there onto Zachary. Valkyrie gonna be.
So here, the Outlaws send a Nana boosted Winston to try and dive the Soldier Nana. But a combination of the Ana nade and the healing station from Soldier prevent them both from dying just from the initial burst impact of the Winston jump, punch, zap combo.
Used by Closer.
Then the Winston gets put to sleep, allowing the Soldier free space to resume his damage doing.
Stay alive.
You
Sleep connecting in onto Muma. Shutting down that nano. The bomb up and no exabyte spree.
And finally, when he's put under pressure, the Soldier can just use the sprint to hightail it out of there, knowing he's done his job.
Point's gonna be eliminated. Muma wakes up, does manage to close out a kill onto Ungo as he uses Primal Rage. OG gonna be matching, however, goes forward, kills the enemy Ana. Just to trade it back. Gets rid of Raucus and the res who's there. Dallas Fuel.
Now notice that Muma has spent all this time and a Primal Rage chasing AKM in the back, while the rest of his team is dying on point. This itself is another win, because you're going to see that the Dallas Fuel eventually turn around, kill Muma after they've killed the rest of his team, and stagger him longer.
Still operating as a 5-man unit here in front of point A. 1 minute and 40 seconds on the clock for Houston Outlaws.
It's a disaster for the Outlaws. They needed that nano. Oh, man.
So overall, there's some big wins for the Fuel, and it all comes down to that Soldier pick. So that sums up the 4 traditional hitscan heroes of Overwatch. But I know that there's plenty of you screaming at the screen that there are more. And indeed there are. And the first name that probably comes to mind is Bastion. Now Bastion is not obviously like the other 4 heroes I've mentioned. He is a hitscan, and actually his primary fire is not dissimilar to Soldier's, but of course he's most definitely not used in the same way. So let's talk about why. Well, firstly, Bastion obviously has very little mobility. He has no method of escaping when dove upon, unlike the Soldier we just saw in that clip. He has a self-heal, but he can't shoot while using it, nor is it as powerful as a Soldier health station, and of course, it can run out. Now if these problems didn't exist, you might see Bastion used in more varied situations than he is. But because they do, there's only really one time to play Bastion, and that is the bunker comp, obviously. Bastion was literally made to be a turret, and if you want to play him to this fullest, why wouldn't you use that to your advantage? In turret mode, he easily out DPSs anyone else on the Overwatch roster, but of course, when he does that, he also makes himself a very inviting target to go and dive, or just focus down, which is why he needs protection, and that's kind of how the bunker comp came to be. And because it's so central to why you'd pick Bastion, let me just take a minute to explain why it works and why it fails. Essentially, to dislodge any comp in Overwatch that's trying to control one spot, bunker or no bunker, you have to do one of 2 things. You either have to out damage it, break the shield that's protecting the comp, and then kill the targets behind it, or you have to circumvent the protection. Now the bunker comp makes the first option incredibly tough to do, because like I said, Bastion will output more damage than anyone else in the game, particularly to shields, who he can just mow down without too much input required on his part. And if you're running Orisa, which you probably will do with bunker, you can add defender's advantage to this, because you'll be able to position your shield first, and have your cooldowns ready. So out DPSing is not an option for the enemy team. That leaves circumventing the shield. Now there's two ways to do this. Either you just jump past the shield and rush the targets behind it, or you run onto the objective and force the bunker to move, provided they're not on it already. Usually when bunkers fail, it's because they were either positioned too close to begin with, and thus made closing the distance too easy for the attackers, or it's because they dislodged themselves, and usually they do this when the attackers just run onto point and they haven't planned to leave a player on there, so they panic and split up. Overall, Bastion relies on a lot of protection, a grouped up team, and the ability to just take one position and sit there. Like I said, a bunker that dislodges itself will inevitably die, so as a Bastion, you can't be spending too much time out of turret mode. This means that you can move around a lot, and is ultimately why it's so difficult to play Bastion on attack, unless you're on a payload map. The payload will move Bastion and the bunker naturally, but on any other map type, that time spent moving from one spot to the other and setting up again is an entire window of opportunity for the enemy team to just run forwards and wipe you out for free. So now that we know all this, let's go over the 5 heroes we've discussed so far, and then summarize what we've talked about. Firstly, McCree, Ashe and Widowmaker work on a scale of range, where McCree likes to fight up front, and Widowmaker likes to fight long range, and Ashe is somewhere in between. Use this information to judge from map to map who's the best pick. On maps with long sidelines, Widowmaker can make full use of her range, and the fact that she doesn't want anyone from the enemy team close to her. On maps with short sidelines and corners and cover, McCree works much better because he doesn't suffer from fall off damage, and enemies will be within range of his flashbang. There aren't many maps that specifically fit Ashe, but if you prefer her to McCree, then go for it. However, the best use for her is often in a bunker comp, where she can be protected while scoping in, but outputting more damage than Widow and at a better range than McCree. Soldier, by comparison, is much more effective when you anticipate being dove upon, and when you want some mobility. On top of that, he offers a lot more consistent damage than the other three, so he's a reliable choice, particularly on defense when you need reliability. On attack, you can afford to miss a few shots with Widowmaker, as long as you eventually get the pick that starts the fight. On defense, you miss 3 or 4 shots in a row, and that's 1000 damage your team didn't get, and now the attackers are on your backline killing them off. Now of course, even more consistent than that is Bastion, who outputs the most damage, but that's counteracted by the fact that he has such low mobility and escape. So overall, consider these factors when you're choosing your Hitscan DPS. I've grouped all of these guys up because they all rely essentially on one primary skill, and that's raw mechanical aim. Players who play one tend to play or at least dabble in the other and gravitate towards them naturally. So I've tried to explain why you'd go for one over the other. Of course, quite often, these guys are picked for the same job as well, and that's to kill Pharah. Again, who you choose often comes down to your comfort with each hero. If the Pharah doesn't have a mercy, then it should be fairly easy for any of these guys to take her down, provided you can hit your shot. When she does have a mercy pocket, things can get tough. Some people like Soldier's consistent damage to chip away at her and scare her. Personally, I think burst damage is the way to go, and that's why you'd pick McCree, Ashe, or ideally Widowmaker, depending on the range of the map. By bursting her down in one headshot, as you can do with Widowmaker, you eliminate the mercy factor entirely, and you are the best answer to Pharah. But again, choose what you guys feel comfortable with. The purpose of this part of the guide is just to point out where these heroes are the most effective and why that's the case, but it's on you to apply it and see what you agree and disagree with. There are, of course, other heroes in Overwatch who count as hitscan, but I think these guys share a lot more in common with the other heroes rather than the hitscans I've just pointed out, so we'll get to them in a different section. For now, I'm going to call an end to this part of the video because there's still lots of DPS to cover, and I'd prefer to do it in a thematic fashion rather than randomly. Still to cover are flankers and situational picks. But that's all from me for today, guys. Hope you found this video helpful, and if you did, please do like, share and subscribe. Otherwise, I'll be back next week with another video. See you guys soon.